This is one of the best Heisman races we've had in a number of years, as there are 5 to 6 players that are still in the running for winning the award. As we enter November, here are the 10 players I have in my top 10 of the Heisman Trophy. Before we get to today's video, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel, so make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. I'll be posting college football videos every day the rest of the season, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. We'll start with UCLA quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who is having the best season of his 5-year career with the Bruins. Through 8 games, he's completing 72% of his passes for 2,000 yards. He's also thrown for 17 touchdowns with only 3 interceptions, while adding over 300 yards on the ground with 5 rushing scores. Thompson-Robinson has been great every game this season and had some incredible performances against ranked opponents in Washington and Utah, but the reason he's so low on this list was his showing against Oregon. He still was pretty solid, as he had 300 total yards with 2 total touchdowns, but UCLA got blown out, and I really think that hurt his chances for the rest of the season. But DTR has still been one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country in 2022. All the way down at number 9 is where I have Alabama quarterback Bryce Young. Now, he's still having a fantastic season for the Tide, but based on him winning last year and his performance so far this year, there are just a number of quarterbacks I have ahead of him. He's been solid, as he's completing 66% of his passes while throwing for 1,900 yards with 18 passing touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. He was pretty solid in Alabama's lone loss of the season, as he threw for 450 yards with 2 touchdowns against Tennessee. Then in his last game against a ranked Mississippi State team, he threw for 250 yards with 2 passing touchdowns. Again, this isn't a knock on the season Bryce Young is having, because he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but like I mentioned, after he won last season with his numbers taking a bit of a hit, I don't think he's going to be a Heisman finalist this season. Up next is LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. Now, in last week's Heisman video, I talked about how he's been my biggest surprise at the quarterback position so far this season. He's been fantastic for LSU in 2022, as he's completing 70% of his passes for 1,800 yards. He's also thrown 12 touchdown passes with only 1 interception. Meanwhile, on the ground, he's rushing for 5 yards a carry with over 500 yards and 9 rushing scores. LSU is ranked number 10, and Jayden Daniels is on the best stretch of his career. A few weeks ago against Florida, he threw for 350 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while rushing for 50 yards with 3 rushing scores. Then in LSU's last game over the number 11 Ole Miss Rebels, he threw for 250 yards with 2 touchdowns while rushing for 120 yards with 3 rushing scores. LSU is now 10 in the country, and they face Alabama this weekend. If Jayden Daniels is able to put up some solid numbers and LSU pulls off the victory, he's going to climb even higher in next week's Heisman rankings. I've really been disrespecting North Carolina quarterback Drake May this season, and having him ranked this low still might be disrespectful. In 8 games so far for North Carolina, he's completing 71% of his passes. He's thrown for 2,700 yards and has 29 passing touchdowns compared to only 3 interceptions. For good measure, he's added nearly 500 yards on the ground with 3 rushing scores. It's been quite the season for May, as he leads the ACC in pass completions and completion percentage. He also leads the conference in passing yards and is 5th in the nation. His 29 passing touchdowns are the most in all of college football, and his passing efficiency rating is the best in the ACC and the 3rd best in the nation as well. Overall, his 3,100 yards of total offense is the best of any player in the entire country. Like I mentioned, it feels disrespectful to have him this low in the rankings. I mean, it's not like North Carolina is a bad team, they only have 1 loss and are ranked inside the top 20 of the college football playoff poll. But I guess the reason he's not higher is just because North Carolina doesn't really have an impressive victory this season. But this past weekend against Pitt, he completed 77% of his passes for 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. He's thrown at least 2 passing touchdowns in every game this season and has 3 games with at least 5 passing touchdowns. He's also thrown for at least 285 yards in every game and has 6 games with more than 300 yards. At this rate, there's a strong possibility that Drake May finishes the season season, leading college football in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Just like TCU, Max Duggan is very underrated when it comes to the Heisman Trophy. In 8 games this season, he's completing 67% of his passes for 2,200 yards. He has 22 touchdown passes with only 2 interceptions. Meanwhile, on the ground, he's added 300 yards with 4 rushing scores. During this insane run for TCU, Duggan has performed excellent against 4 ranked teams. He's knocked off Oklahoma, Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State while putting up fantastic numbers in every game. This past weekend, TCU took down West Virginia. Now, although the Mountaineers aren't a ranked team or are above 500, Duggan still had a solid game as he threw for 340 yards with 3 passing touchdowns. TCU is still undefeated, and it looks like they're going to be making a playoff push, so Duggan is a name that's going to be in the Heisman running until the final week of the season. If it wasn't for USC losing a few weeks ago, Caleb Williams might be in first or second place in the Heisman running. The USC quarterback is completing 65% of his passes with 2,400 yards. He's thrown 24 touchdowns with only 1 interception, while adding 250 yards on the ground with 3 rushing scores. Even in USC's loss to Utah, Caleb Williams was still excellent as he threw for just under 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns with 60 rushing yards. This past weekend in a road victory at Arizona, Williams had probably his best game with the Trojans. He threw for over 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. It was kind of a slow start to the season for Caleb Williams as he had only 9 passing touchdowns through his first 4 games. But over his last 2 games, he's thrown 10 passing touchdowns with 800 passing yards. As long as USC is able to win out and he continues to put up really solid numbers, Caleb Williams is going to be in the Heisman running until the end of the season as well. The best running back in college football continues to be Blake Corum. For the Wolverines this season, he's rushed for over 1,000 yards and is averaging 6 yards a carry. He's also scored 14 touchdowns as well. Corum is currently number 5 in the country in rushing yards and is number 2 in the country in rushing touchdowns, but he's doing this while being the number 1 offensive option for a top 5 team in Michigan. After getting off to a slow start this season, he's rushed for at least 125 yards in his last 5 games. This past weekend against Michigan State, he rushed for 177 yards with a rushing score. He also caught a pass for a touchdown as well. Corum has a touchdown in every game this season, and over his last 5 games, he's scored 12 touchdowns on the ground. Over his last 5 games, Corum has rushed for 843 yards. That's an average of 169 yards per game. If you were to take his pace over his last 5 games, he'd be on pace for a 12-game season of over 2,000 rushing yards. That's just how dominant he's been on the ground this season for Michigan. Coming in at number 3 though is Oregon quarterback Bo Nix, who continues to be one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football. Through 8 games this season, he's completing 72% of his passes. He's thrown for 2,200 yards and has 20 passing touchdowns with 5 interceptions. Meanwhile, on the ground, he's averaging 7.5 yards per carry with over 400 yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. Bo Nix is number 1 in the Pac-12 in touchdowns responsible for and is number 2 in all of college football. It just seems like at this point, week after week, he's somehow surpassing his previous week. This past weekend on the road at Cal, he completed 77% of his passes for 412 yards. He threw 3 passing touchdowns and added 60 yards on the ground with 3 rushing scores. If Bo Nix just somehow would have been able to beat Georgia in week 1, you can make the case he would be the Heisman frontrunner. But still, even with that loss, I have him at number 3 in my rankings. All season, I've been saying CJ Stroud is going to be my number 1 until something major happens. Now, Stroud hasn't been playing awful, but there's just another player that has been playing slightly better, so I got him at number 2. In 8 games this season for the Buckeyes, Stroud is completing 71% of his passes for 2,400 yards. He's thrown 29 touchdown passes with only 4 interceptions. Stroud leads the country in passing efficiency rating with a rating of 200.2. He's also number 1 in the Big Ten in total yards, passing touchdowns, and passing yards. This past weekend, in a come-from-behind victory over Penn State, Stroud threw for 350 yards, but he had only 1 passing touchdown, his only game this season in which he didn't throw at least 2. Again, Stroud has been solid so far this season, and he's been putting up some incredible numbers, But there's another quarterback who I think has just been slightly better, and that's why I have him at number 1. My number 1 pick for the Heisman entering November is Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker. Through 8 games this season, he's completing 71% of his passes for 2,300 yards. He's thrown 21 touchdown passes with only 1 interception. On the ground, he's rushed for over 330 yards with 4 rushing scores. Tennessee is having one of the best seasons in program history, and it's largely due to Hooker. He had another solid showing in a ranked win against Kentucky this past weekend. Hooker completed 76% of his passes for 250 yards. He threw 3 passing touchdowns with no interceptions while rushing in a touchdown as well. With the biggest game of the season this upcoming weekend against Georgia, Hendon Hooker really has a chance to put the Heisman away with a solid performance and a victory. Well, those are the 10 players I currently have in my Heisman race. Was there a player I had ranked too high, or a player ranked too low, or was there a player that I didn't mention that should have been on this list? Whoever you think it is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you love college football, this is definitely the place for you. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm posting videos every day during the rest of the season, so make sure to subscribe if you call yourself a college football fan. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.